It's about 1:15 in the morning, and I'm awake because I feel great. Really, I feel great. You know, if I thought I was having a heart attack or something, I probably wouldn't bother setting up a camera. Honey, I have chest pains. Quick, get a tripod. I think I'm dying. Is there enough light in here to shoot? Oh, God, I can barely breathe. Switch the mic to minus 10 dB.
In 2004, the Centers for Disease Control released a PowerPoint presentation that showed obesity growing and spreading like a contagious disease. The media ate it up. Spurlock featured it in Super Size Me.
And at the time, there were headlines trumpeting everywhere that obesity was soon to overtake smoking as the #1 cause of preventable death in this country. The head of the CDC, Julie Gerberding, went before Congress and issued big warnings. And there was a big uproar over the number of deaths that were to occur. Basically, what they did was divide their survey samples between people who were obese and people who were not obese, and then basically looked at rates of death. Now, if you were obese and you died from a snake bite, they would say that it was your obesity that was causing your death, not the snake bite. And this was part of a little statistical hanky-panky on their part.
In other news today, the Centers for Disease Control said it made a mistake about the scope of the obesity epidemic in the country.
Roughly a year later, another set of researchers from the CDC offered a much, much lower set of estimates. According to their estimates, it was roughly 25,000 people a year who were dying from weighing too much.
Researchers say that mathematical errors exaggerated the death toll.
Why did the CDC inflate the numbers of deaths attributable to obesity?
Follow the money.
I think it's all about funding and bureaucratic mission. When I talk to a few CDC officials, they're constantly preoccupied about how much money the government or Congress is going to allot for them for the next year. And they're constantly worried about getting their funding cut.
Follow the money.
All of this might have gone unnoticed except for the anti-tobacco people who see this as a zero-sum game. So they see that if obesity becomes a big public health issue, it's going to crowd out funding to tackle smoking as a public health issue. So they were among the first people to point out a lot of the methodological problems in the estimates relating obesity to public health outcomes.
So the question is, what happens once you've eliminated most of the true epidemics? You start to come up with metaphorical epidemics. Epidemics of smoking, epidemics of obesity.
And it would be A-OK if there weren't secondhand obesity. Secondhand obesity.
Secondhand obesity?
Rule number 1 when you're competing for taxpayer money is to wildly exaggerate the size of the problem. At a recent meeting of government health officials from around the world, they called obesity a pandemic that will overwhelm the world's healthcare systems. Apparently, fat people are stampeding the world's emergency rooms, choking on their own fat. Or maybe not. So how fat are we anyway? I keep hearing these statistics like 2/3 of American adults are overweight and 25% are obese. I definitely see a lot more people who look like this than I used to. But it's not even close to 25%. Most of the people I see look pretty normal.
The way the health statistics are bannered about, you would think that most Americans have gained anywhere from 50 to 100 pounds. In fact, that's not the case. Most Americans have only gained between 8 and 10 pounds. It's just the statistics and the numbers have made those numbers seem very large.
8 or 10 pounds? I gained that much on my honeymoon. How does an extra 10 pounds create an epidemic?
You have to go back to 1998, where the National Institutes of Health issued a report where they said that BMI, the body mass index, would be the standard of how we evaluate people's weight, and that people with a BMI of 25 or more would be considered overweight, and people with a BMI of 30 or more would be considered obese. That decision overnight suddenly meant millions and millions of Americans were considered overweight. For example, me, I'm 6 feet tall, 190 pounds, and I am technically overweight.
You are?
I am technically overweight.
Could you stand up and turn around? Is
Sure,
that too embarrassing?
No. See, this is my wrinkled shirt.
You're considered overweight?
I'm considered overweight by contemporary standards.
Okay.
I'm in good company. George Bush, Michael Jordan, any number of figures who are considered to be very fit are also considered overweight.
BMI is a ratio of your height to weight, period. If you're 6 feet tall and weigh 225, you have a BMI of over 30, and according to the government, you're obese. It doesn't matter if the extra weight is in your belly or your biceps. So in spite of all the media hype, we don't have a sudden epidemic of obesity. We had a sudden change in the definition of obesity. But why would our own government want to tell so many of us that we're obese?
Follow the money.
Now, most of these people, including the chair, Xavier Pisonier, are heavily subsidized by the weight loss industry. Most of them receive numerous research grants, serve on various boards, have received various types of funding or awards from various pharmaceutical and other weight loss companies. The conflict of interest between obesity researchers and the weight loss industry is large and problematic.
Here are some no-baloney facts that the CDC doesn't mention. In 1970, the median age in America was 27. Today, it's 36. Is it really a big shock that a population that's nearly 10 years older would also be 10 pounds heavier? Also in 1970, blacks and Hispanics made up about 15% of the population. Today, that's more than 25% and still growing. Well, guess what? Blacks and Hispanics are much more likely to have a BMI of over 30. And it's not because they're lazy or stupid, they're just genetically predisposed to be thicker than white people. This isn't an epidemic, it's a population shift, and it makes some people very uncomfortable.
I think a lot of our apprehension about obesity is tied up with an aversion towards race. White people see higher percentages of Latinos or African Americans being obese, and it gets tied up with a lot of these issues about individual self-control. And we end up finding that, for example, a lot of the same types of words and descriptions that are used to denigrate minorities and denigrate the poor are also used to denigrate fat people. One of the most interesting things I found on this was when I go to conferences of obesity researchers. Everyone is a thin white person.
It's not just a personal choice. The rest of us pick up the tab. The next generation's fat. We see that obesity compromises educational possibilities.
And it's all of these thin white people who are fretting so much about the weight of, black and brown people.
To be perfectly honest, I wish I could wear a swimsuit in public without feeling embarrassed, which I haven't done since I was maybe 13. But that's not what really matters. My first daughter was born the same week I turned 45. I was 46 when her little sister came along. I want to live long enough to see them grow up and become whoever they're supposed to be. I want to dance at their weddings. I want to play with my grandchildren. So is the extra 20 pounds I'm carrying around going to kill me before my time? Well, let's look at a couple more no-baloney facts the CDC doesn't talk about. People the government classifies as overweight actually have longer average lifespans than people classified as normal weight. And men who are classified as obese but get regular exercise are only half as likely to die prematurely as thin men who don't exercise.
One of the big problems of making weight a barometer of health and fitness is that it simply says that if someone is thin, no matter how fit they are, they're healthier than somebody who is fat. When in fact, the scientific evidence is overwhelmingly conclusive that people who are fit and active are healthier no matter what their body size is.
Okay, you didn't tell me that you work out, but I'm feeling lots of muscle here. And what do you do for physical activity, Tom?
Walk.
Daily?
Your blood tests look good. The HDL is incredible at 61. And your triglycerides were great. They were 70. Everything is fine.
The problem with linking obesity to most diseases is much like saying that, well, the real problem with lung cancer is bad breath or smelly clothes, rather than blaming cigarettes, i.e. we're blaming an associated symptom rather than an underlying cause of these health conditions. And why are we blaming the symptoms?
Follow the money.
Well, it's very profitable for certain groups in our society to treat these symptoms.
And that's all obesity is. It's a symptom. If you have chronically high blood sugar, there's a very good chance it'll make you fat. But there are plenty of thin people who also have high blood sugar, and there are plenty of fat people like me. I'm overweight, in fact, I'm technically obese, but I'm perfectly healthy and my blood sugar is normal. And if anything is going to kill you, it's high blood sugar.
Yeah, I think the most difficult group of people to work with as a physician are the people who have the metabolic problems. They have high blood pressure, they have type 2 diabetes, and yet they don't gain weight. Because it's very difficult for a physician to make that person understand that they have to change the way they eat.
Over the past 30 years, millions of Americans have developed a condition that doctors call metabolic syndrome. It begins with high blood sugar and can eventually cause insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease. And that's the real epidemic. So what's causing it? Well, a big part of the problem might just be the very advice that was supposed to make us healthy.
And you ask if I've got the facts, I just might have a heart attack.
Now, it's probably not going to make my doctor very happy to hear this, but I ran an analysis on my fast food diet so far. I'm about 2 weeks into it, and I'm getting about 54% of my calories from fat and about 22% of my calories from saturated fat. According to all the usual dietary advice, that means my cholesterol is probably shooting up. I'm putting myself at risk for a heart attack down the line if I keep doing this.
The usual advice for avoiding heart disease is to eat a low-fat diet with plenty of whole grains and substitute vegetable oils for saturated animal fats. But does that advice really fit with human biology? Let's start with one simple idea. Mother Nature isn't stupid. She didn't make human beings the only species on Earth who prefers foods that will kill us. So what do human beings naturally like to eat?
Your natural preference is for things that are salty, things that are sweet, and things that are fatty. You have those three native desires for good reason. Those are the things that are good for you. That's where the nutrients that you need are located.
In nature, sweet means fruit, along with certain vegetables like carrots, and those are good for you. Fats occur naturally in foods like olives and nuts, but for most of human history, the biggest source of fat was saturated animal fat, which is fatty and salty. Yum, yum. And for millions of years, this is exactly how we ate. We ate no sugar, almost no starch, a little bit of vegetable fat, and a whole lot of saturated animal fat, up to 5 or even 10 times as much as the experts say we should. But almost nobody got heart disease.
If you look at pre-agricultural humans, at their skeletal remains, the cortical thickness of their bones, they're robust, they're tall, they had good teeth. When societies became agricultural and we became short of stature, tooth decay became rampant, infections were rampant. Human health devolved when we adopted agriculture.
If you could pack all of human history into 1 year, we've only been farming and eating grain since about yesterday, which is when we became shorter and fatter. We only started consuming processed vegetable oils about 10 minutes ago, which is when heart disease became our #1 killer. So after examining all this human history, the experts came to the obvious conclusion. We need to eat a lot more of these. And so they convinced us that human health depends on foods we didn't eat for more than 99% of our entire existence. How did this happen? In the 1950s, a biochemist named Ancel Keys published a study that compared heart disease and fat consumption in a half-dozen countries. The more fat, the more heart disease. The trend line was unmistakable. Just one little problem. Keys left out countries where people eat a lot of fat but have very little heart disease, like Holland and Norway. He also left out countries where people don't eat much fat but do have a lot of heart disease, like Chile. In fact, Keys had reliable data from 22 countries, and the results were all over the place. But you can't make a big splash in the scientific community with a trend line that looks like this. So Keys did what any dedicated researcher would do. He threw out the data that didn't fit and published his results. His punishment for this bit of scientific chicanery was to get his picture on the cover of Time magazine. Keys became known as the father of the lipid hypothesis, which says that eating saturated fat raises the cholesterol in your blood, and high cholesterol in your blood clogs your arteries and causes heart disease.
The hypothesis that when you eat high fat, that produces high cholesterol, and the cholesterol produces heart disease, is wrong in every one of those links.
This whole idea that dietary fat causes cholesterol problems is sort of a myth. The whole idea that cholesterol problems lead to heart disease is a myth.
The theory is completely and totally wrong. It was a theory that was made out of whole cloth and then pushed.
The term artery clogging saturated fat, it's as though it's all one word.